the arrival hall at Paris Orly Airport became the focus of international cameras. Stepping out into the public concourse were Rima Hassan and Emma Ferraud, both members of the European Parliament, together with French National Assembly deputies François Piquemal and Marie Mesmer. Just hours earlier, they had been expelled from Israel after taking part in what has come to be known as the Gaza Flotilla, a maritime convoy of international activists seeking to reach the Gaza Strip by sea. Their return was not quiet. Surrounded by dozens of fellow activists and supporters waving Palestinian flags, the delegation walked slowly through the arrivals area, determined to show that their removal from Israel had not silenced their protest. As the cameras closed in, the parliamentarians stopped to join in chants. Their voices rang out above the crowd. "Free Palestine." Moments later came a sharper refrain, "Stop genocide." The slogans reflected the same demands that had motivated the flotilla's voyage, an attempt to break the Israeli maritime blockade and draw attention to the humanitarian crisis inside Gaza. Supporters lining the concourse clapped and sang in solidarity. For them, the flotilla's interception at sea and the subsequent detention and expulsion of its passengers had only amplified the urgency of their cause. At the heart of the group stood Rima Hassan, a Franco-Palestinian member of the European Parliament. Side by side with François Piquemal, she held a Palestinian flag high, a gesture both of defiance and of identification with the civilian population of Gaza. When given the microphone, Hassan's message turned to those she described as the unseen victims of the conflict. "I especially want to focus on the 11,000 Palestinian political prisoners. We had a tiny glimpse of what they could be going through in Israeli areas, and it's very, very important to keep them in mind with the 5 days of detention we had. See you tomorrow at République, 6:30 p.m. Her words linked the flotilla passengers' brief detention to the far harsher, longer-term incarceration faced by thousands of Palestinians inside Israeli prisons. The Gaza Flotilla 2025 was the latest in a series of civil society efforts dating back more than a decade to challenge Israel's maritime blockade of the coastal enclave. Organizers say the ships carry medical and relief supplies. Israeli authorities describe them as political provocations and insist that all aid must pass through designated checkpoints on land. The convoy involved more than 160 activists from different countries, including lawmakers from Europe. It was intercepted by the Israeli Navy before reaching Gaza's shoreline. Passengers were detained for several days and then deported. The scene at Orly Airport illustrated the intersection of European domestic politics and the ongoing Israel-Gaza conflict. Hassan and her colleagues returned to France, not as anonymous deportees, but as public figures positioning themselves as witnesses to what they regard as human rights violations. Their remarks and the visual images of their reception are already fueling debate in Paris and Brussels over Europe's stance toward the conflict. By emphasizing the plight of 11,000 Palestinian political prisoners, Hassan sought to widen the focus beyond the blockade itself. She suggested that even a short stint in Israeli detention had given her a sliver of insight into the conditions faced by Palestinian detainees, many of whom have spent years in custody. Her call for a gathering at Place de la République in Paris signalled an intent to keep the issue in the public eye, turning a forced expulsion into a rallying point for further activism. The incident comes at a volatile moment. The conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza has persisted through multiple ceasefire collapses, periodic escalations, and continuing humanitarian distress. International relief agencies warn that the blockade, now in its 18th year, has devastated Gaza's economy and infrastructure. For Israel, the naval cordon is presented as a security necessity aimed at preventing weapons smuggling to Hamas and other armed groups. For flotilla organizers and their supporters, it is a form of collective punishment that must be challenged by non-violent direct action. Previous flotilla attempts, notably the 2010 Mavi Marmara incident, ended in deadly violence and international recriminations. In comparison, the 2025 voyage was contained without bloodshed, but the deportations and the high-profile involvement of elected officials have once again thrust the tactic into the headlines. As the passengers dispersed into the French capital, the political ripples of their journey were only beginning to spread. Supporters hope that their experience and their testimony will galvanize European public opinion and increase pressure for a change in policy toward Gaza. Critics accuse them of staging political theatre that risks inflaming tensions without improving conditions on the ground. For now, the image remains 4 lawmakers stepping off an ordinary flight into Orly Airport, greeted as returning campaigners after a brief but symbolic confrontation at sea and in Israeli detention. In the words of Rima Hassan, their experience has left them determined to keep attention on those she calls the 11,000 Palestinian political prisoners, a reminder, she says, of the human stakes behind the flotilla's voyage. I especially want to focus on the 11,000 Palestinian political prisoners. We had a tiny glimpse of what they could be going through in Israeli areas, and it's very, very important to keep them in mind with the 5 days of detention we had. See you tomorrow at République, 6:30 p.m.
On se retrouve demain à République, 18h30.